The blistering sun hung low over the barren desert of Iraq, casting long shadows over the endless expanse of golden sand. Our boots crunched against the ground, kicking up small clouds of dust with every step. The air was thick with heat, and the horizon shimmered as if the earth itself was alive and restless. We'd come here with a purpose, a mission that started as a simple exploration but soon spiraled into something far more sinister than any of us could have imagined. It all began when a local shepherd stumbled upon something unusual in the middle of nowhere. He'd been guiding his sheep across this remote stretch of land for years, a place so isolated that even maps seemed to forget its existence. But on that particular day, he noticed something strange, an enormous crater that hadn't been there before. He couldn't explain it, and the more he stared at it, the more uneasy he became. It wasn't just its size or sudden appearance that troubled him. It was the eerie silence that surrounded it. No birds, no insects, just an overwhelming sense of emptiness. When word of the discovery reached us, we were skeptical at first. Craters, especially in a place like this, weren't entirely uncommon. They could be caused by meteorites or even old wartime bombings, remnants of conflicts long forgotten. But something about this one seemed off. The shepherd's account was vague yet chilling, and the photos he'd managed to take on his aging phone didn't help. The edges of the crater were jagged and unnatural, almost as if something had erupted from within the earth rather than struck it from above. Curiosity quickly turned into obsession. With our equipment packed and our team assembled, we set out to investigate. The group was a mix of expertise. A geologist, a historian, a journalist, and myself. Each of us was drawn to the mystery for different reasons. For the geologist, it was the scientific anomaly. For the historian, the possibility of uncovering something ancient. For the journalist, the thrill of a potential scoop. And for me, well, I guess I've always been drawn to the unknown, to places and stories that make your skin crawl in ways you can't quite explain. The journey to the site was grueling. We drove for hours through terrain that seemed to stretch on forever, the silence broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional nervous joke. The farther we traveled, the more desolate the landscape became. It was as if we were heading straight into the heart of nothingness. And then we saw it. At first, it was just a dark smudge on the horizon, a strange blemish on the otherwise pristine sand. But as we got closer, the full scale of the crater came into view, and it was far more massive than any of us had anticipated. Standing on its edge, I felt a wave of vertigo. The drop was sheer, and the bottom was shrouded in shadow, even in the harsh daylight. It was as if the earth had opened its mouth, revealing a void that swallowed light and sound alike. The geologist immediately went to work, examining the rocks and soil. He muttered something about the unusual composition of the crater walls, but his words were lost in the growing tension that seemed to hang over us. The historian, meanwhile, was pacing around the perimeter, scribbling notes and taking photos. "This doesn't look natural," he said at one point, his voice tight with unease. As the sun began to set, the journalist set up her camera, documenting everything with a meticulousness that hinted at her own uneasiness. "People are going to want answers," she said, her tone wavering. "And right now, I'm not sure we have any." It wasn't until nightfall that things took a turn. The desert, which had been scorching during the day, became eerily cold. A chilling wind swept through the camp, carrying with it a faint, almost imperceptible hum. At first, we thought it was just the wind playing tricks on us, but as the sound grew louder, it became clear that it was coming from the crater. None of us wanted to admit it, but there was something deeply unsettling about the noise. It wasn't just a sound. It felt like a vibration, a low, throbbing pulse that you could feel in your chest. The geologist, normally calm and composed, looked visibly shaken. "That's not natural," he whispered, his eyes fixed on the darkness below. Despite our fear, curiosity got the better of us. We decided to lower a camera into the crater, hoping to get a better look at what lay beneath. The footage started out normal enough, just jagged rock walls and layers of sediment, but then the screen went black. At first, we thought the camera had malfunctioned, but then the feed returned, revealing something that froze us all in place. It was brief, just a flicker of movement at the edge of the frame, but it was enough to send a shiver down my spine. Something was down there, something alive. We pulled the camera back up, our hands trembling as we replayed the footage. The image was grainy and distorted, but the movement was unmistakable. It wasn't human, and it wasn't an animal. It was something else entirely. That night, none of us slept. The hum from the crater grew louder, almost deafening, and the ground seemed to tremble beneath us. By morning, we knew one thing for certain. Whatever we had stumbled upon was far more dangerous than we could have ever imagined. And as we packed up our gear, preparing to leave, the journalist turned to me and said, "We can't just walk away from this. People need to know." She was right, of course. But even now, as I sit here recounting the events of that night, I can't shake the feeling that some things are better left buried. Because the truth about that crater, the truth that we discovered, was more terrifying than anything we could have ever prepared for. The morning after that restless night, the desert felt different. The sun had barely risen, but the air was heavier, as if the land itself was bracing for something. None of us spoke much as we loaded our gear back into the vehicles. The crater sat behind us like an unspoken question, its presence impossible to ignore but too overwhelming to confront head-on. I caught myself glancing back at it more than once, half expecting to see something, or someone, emerge from its depths. The journalist, Sarah, was the first to break the silence. "What do we even tell people about this?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. She wasn't addressing anyone in particular, but the weight of her question hung in the air. "We don't tell them anything," Mark, the geologist, replied firmly. His usual analytical tone was tinged with something I hadn't heard from him before. Fear. "Not until we know what we're dealing with." Sarah shot him a look, but she didn't argue. Instead, she turned her attention to the camera in her lap, scrolling through the footage from the night before. I could see her hands trembling slightly, though she tried to hide it. Then there was Dr. Karim, the historian. He'd been unusually quiet since sunrise, pacing the edge of the camp with a notebook in hand. He'd scribbled something down, then scratched it out over and over, as if wrestling with a thought he couldn't quite pin down. When I finally asked him what was on his mind, he hesitated before answering. "This area. It's not as empty as it seems," he said, his voice low. "There are stories, legends that go back centuries. Most of them are dismissed as folklore, but," he trailed off, glancing toward the crater. "But what? Press?" Karim shook his head. "It's just the shape of the crater, the way it appeared so suddenly. It reminds me of something I read years ago. An old text describing a place where the earth opened up and swallowed an entire village. They said it was cursed ground, a punishment from the heavens." The word sent a chill down my spine, but I forced a laugh, trying to lighten the mood. "Cursed ground. Come on, Karim. You don't really believe that, do you?" He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes told me he wasn't joking. As we prepared to leave, Mark insisted on taking more samples from the crater's edge. "Just a few minutes," he said, crouching near the rim with his tools. Sarah and I stood a safe distance away, watching as he chipped at the rock with meticulous precision. Karim wandered off a bit, still scribbling in his notebook, while I tried to keep my thoughts from spiraling into worst-case scenarios. That's when I noticed something strange. The wind had been steady all morning, a constant breeze that kicked up sand and whispered through the dry air. But as I stood there, it seemed to shift. The breeze died down completely, replaced by an eerie stillness. Even the hum from the crater, which had been a constant presence since the night before, seemed to grow quieter. "Do you feel that?" I asked Sarah, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, her eyes fixed on the crater. "It's too quiet," she said, echoing my own thoughts. Before I could respond, Mark stood up abruptly, holding something in his gloved hand. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, more to himself than to us. "What is it?" Sarah asked, stepping closer. Mark held up the sample for us to see. It looked like an ordinary chunk of rock at first glance, but as he turned it in his hand, the light caught something embedded within it, something that shimmered faintly like metal. It's not just the composition, Mark said, his voice rising slightly. This shouldn't be here. The geological layers around the crater suggest that this area hasn't been disturbed for thousands of years. Whatever caused this crater, it's not natural. His words hung in the air like a warning, and for a moment, none of us knew what to say. Then Kareem's voice broke the silence. We need to go, he said, hurrying toward us with an urgency that made my heart race. Now. What's wrong? I asked, but he didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed his bag and started loading it into the vehicle. Kareem, wait, Sarah started, but he cut her off. I don't know what's down there, and I don't want to find out, he said, his voice sharp. We've already stayed too long. Mark looked like he wanted to argue, but the fear in Kareem's eyes was enough to make him think twice. Reluctantly, he packed up his equipment, and within minutes, we were on the move again, leaving the crater behind us. As the vehicles bumped along the uneven terrain, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every shadow, every distant rock formation seemed to take on a menacing shape. I told myself it was just my imagination, a lingering effect of the tension from the night before. But deep down I wasn't so sure. We drove for hours, the desert stretching out endlessly before us. Eventually we reached a small outpost, a cluster of weathered buildings that served as a waypoint for travelers like us. It wasn't much, but it felt like a haven after the desolation of the crater site. Inside, the air was cool, and the faint hum of an old ceiling fan provided a strange sense of comfort. We sat around a table, sipping on lukewarm water and trying to process what we'd just experienced. What now? Sarah asked, breaking the silence. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. We need to analyze the samples, review the footage, figure out what we're dealing with. And then what? Kareem countered. What if this isn't something we can explain? What if it's something we're not supposed to explain? His words sent a ripple of unease through the group, but no one responded. That's when the power went out. The room plunged into darkness, and for a moment, all we could hear was the sound of our own breathing. Then, in the distance, a faint rumble. It was low and guttural, like the growl of some enormous creature. What the hell was that? Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. No one answered. The rumble grew louder, and the ground beneath us seemed to tremble. It wasn't an earthquake, it was something else, something deeper. Instinctively, we grabbed our flashlights and rushed outside, scanning the horizon for any sign of what was happening. And that's when we saw it. Far off in the direction of the crater, a column of light shot into the sky, piercing through the clouds like a beacon. It was blindingly bright, yet it seemed to pulse with a strange, otherworldly rhythm. For a moment, none of us could move. We just stood there, frozen in place, as the light seemed to reach out toward us. What is that? Mark muttered, his voice barely audible. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that whatever was happening, it wasn't over. And somehow, I knew that we were being pulled back into the mystery, whether we wanted to be or not. The column of light seemed alive, pulsating with an energy that didn't belong to this world. It wasn't just bright, it felt oppressive, as though it was pressing down on us, invading our senses. No one spoke. We just stood there, staring, caught in the gravity of its unnatural presence. My heart raced, and my instincts screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. None of us could. Sarah was the first to snap out of it. She grabbed my arm, her grip firm but trembling. We need to go back, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Back. I echoed, my mind reeling. The thought of returning to that crater, the source of whatever this was, felt insane. Look at it, she said, gesturing toward the light. We can't just leave this. We need to figure out what's going on. Figure it out. Are you serious? Kareem's voice was sharp, his fear bubbling to the surface. This isn't something we can figure out, Sarah. We're in over our heads. You saw that thing last night. We shouldn't even be talking about going back. Mark was silent, staring at the light with an intensity that made me nervous. He hadn't said a word since it appeared, but I could see the gears turning in his head. He was trying to make sense of it, to analyze it the way he would a rock formation or a fault line. But this wasn't something he could measure or categorize, and I could see the frustration and fear creeping in. Finally he spoke. "It's not natural," he said quietly, almost to himself. "It's not a meteorite. It's not seismic activity. It's something else." "Exactly," Kareem snapped. "Something else. Something we shouldn't be messing with." But Sarah wouldn't let it go. "If we leave now, we might never know what this is. Don't you want answers? Don't you want to know why it's here?" Her words hung in the air, challenging us. And as much as I wanted to agree with Kareem, to pack up, leave, and never look back, something about the light drew me in. It wasn't just curiosity. It was like it was calling to me, pulling me toward it. "We go back," I said finally, surprising even myself. Kareem stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You can't be serious." "I am," I said, trying to steady my voice. "If we don't, someone else will. And who knows what could happen if this, whatever it is, goes unchecked." Mark nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the horizon. "I agree. We need to document this, gather more data. But we have to be careful. We don't know what we're dealing with." Kareem shook his head, his frustration evident. "You're all insane," he muttered. But he didn't argue any further. The drive back to the crater felt surreal. The desert seemed different now, more alive. Shadows shifted in ways they shouldn't have, and the wind carried faint, unrecognizable whispers. None of us spoke much. The weight of what we were heading into was too heavy to put into words. When we finally arrived, the sight before us was even more terrifying than I'd imagined. The light wasn't just a column anymore. It had expanded, spilling over the edges of the crater like a glowing mist. It moved with a strange fluidity, swirling and pulsing as if it had a mind of its own. Mark stepped out first, his equipment in hand. He moved cautiously, his every step deliberate. Sarah followed, her camera at the ready, while Kareem lingered by the vehicles, clearly reluctant to get any closer. "This is incredible," Mark said, his voice filled with a mix of awe and fear. He knelt by the crater's edge, setting up his instruments. "The energy levels here are off the charts. I've never seen anything like this." Sarah was already filming, capturing every detail. "What do you think it is?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with tension. Mark didn't answer right away. He was too focused on the readings. "It's not natural," he said finally. "Whatever this is, it's generating its own energy. And it's increasing. Increasing." Kareem repeated, his voice rising with alarm. "What does that mean? Is it going to explode or something?" "I don't know," Mark admitted. "But we need more data." As Mark worked, I found myself drawn closer to the crater. The light seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat, or maybe it was the other way around. I couldn't tell. All I knew was that I felt a strange connection to it, like it was trying to communicate with me. "Be careful," Sarah said, her voice snapping me out of my trance. I nodded, stepping back slightly. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the light was watching us, studying us as much as we were studying it. And then we heard it. A sound, low and guttural, rising from deep within the crater. It was faint at first, barely audible over the hum of the light. But it grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't just a noise, it was a voice. We froze, listening intently. The voice didn't speak in any language we recognized, but its tone was unmistakable. It was angry. "What the hell is that?" Sarah whispered, her camera still rolling. "No idea," Mark said, his eyes wide. "But we need to get out of here." For once, Kareem didn't argue. He was already backing away, his fear now fully evident. But before we could move, the ground beneath us began to shake. It wasn't like the subtle tremors we'd felt the night before. This was violent, as if the earth itself was trying to throw us off balance. "Run!" Mark shouted, grabbing his equipment. We sprinted toward the vehicles, the sound of the voice growing louder behind us. I risked a glance back and saw the light surging upward, its intensity blinding. The mist had begun to rise, spilling out of the crater and spreading across the ground like a living thing. By the time we reached the vehicles, the shaking had stopped, but the voice lingered, echoing in our minds even after it had gone silent. As we sped away, none of us spoke. There was nothing to say. We had come looking for answers, but all we'd found were more questions. And as the light faded into the distance, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Whatever we had awakened out there, it wasn't finished with us yet. The drive away from the crater felt endless. The desert, usually a blank canvas of monotony, now seemed like a living, breathing thing. Every shadow felt like it was watching us. Every gust of wind carried whispers we couldn't quite understand. None of us spoke for the first hour, our minds too tangled in what we'd just seen. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that they ached, but I couldn't relax. I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't left the crater behind, that somehow it was still with us. Mark finally broke the silence. "The energy readings," he said. His voice quieter than usual. They weren't just increasing. They were shifting. Like it was reacting to us. Reacting. Kareem's voice was sharp, his fear bubbling back to the surface. "You're saying that thing knew we were there?" Mark hesitated, his hands fidgeting with the notebook in his lap. "I don't know what I'm saying. But it wasn't just random. The way it pulsed, the way the mist moved, it wasn't natural. It was deliberate." Kareem leaned forward from the back seat, his eyes wide. "We shouldn't have gone back. I told you this wasn't something we could handle, but none of you listened." "Kareem, enough," Sarah snapped. She had been quiet up until now, her camera resting in her lap, but her frustration was clear. "We're all scared, okay? But blaming each other isn't going to help." "It's not about blame," Kareem shot back. "It's about survival. Whatever we woke up back there, it's not going to stop. You saw what it did, the light, the voice, the ground shaking like that. We need to warn someone. Authorities, scientists, someone who actually knows what they're doing." "Warn them about what?" Sarah countered. "We don't even know what it is. And what if they don't believe us? What if they think we're making it up?" Kareem opened his mouth to argue but stopped short. The air in the vehicle felt heavier, the kind of silence that carries weight, as if the desert itself was listening to us. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life. Static filled the cabin, sharp and grating, making us all jump. I reached over to turn it off, but before I could, a voice cut through the noise. It wasn't in English, or any language I recognized, but it was unmistakably human. The words were garbled, distorted, but there was an urgency to them, like someone was trying to warn us. Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her face pale. I nodded, my heart pounding. "It's probably just interference," I said, though I didn't believe it for a second. The voice on the radio sounded too clear, too deliberate, to be a coincidence. Kareem leaned forward, his eyes locked on the radio. "Interference doesn't sound like that." Before anyone could respond, the static cut out, replaced by a deep, vibrating hum. It was the same sound we'd heard at the crater, and it sent a shiver down my spine. The vehicle lurched suddenly, as if something had struck the ground beneath us. I slammed on the brakes, and we skidded to a halt, the desert stretching out in eerie silence around us. "What was that?" Mark asked, his voice tight. I didn't answer. Couldn't. My eyes were fixed on the horizon, where a faint glow had appeared. It was the same light as before, distant but unmistakable, and it was moving, closer, faster than seemed possible. "We need to go," Kareem said, his voice shaking. "Now." I didn't need to be told twice. I threw the vehicle into gear and floored the accelerator, the tires kicking up sand as we sped away. But no matter how fast we went, the light seemed to follow, growing brighter with every passing second. Sarah was filming again, her camera trained on the rear window. "It's not stopping," she said, her voice tinged with panic. "It's coming after us." "It's not possible," Mark muttered, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. "Light doesn't move like that." Kareem was gripping the seat in front of him, his knuckles white. told you. I told you we shouldn't have gone back. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the air like a living thing. The light was almost blinding now, casting long, distorted shadows across the desert. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it stopped. The hum faded, and the light winked out, leaving us in total darkness. I slowed the vehicle to a crawl, my hands shaking on the wheel. Is it gone? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, Mark said, his eyes scanning the horizon. But I don't think we should stick around to find out. Sarah lowered her camera, her face pale. It's playing with us, she said quietly. Whatever it is, it's not just some random phenomenon. It knows we're here. No one argued. We drove in silence, the weight of her words settling over us like a thick fog. The further we got from the crater, the more the tension seemed to ease, but none of us could shake the feeling that we weren't truly safe. When we finally reached the nearest town, it felt like stepping into another world. The streets were quiet, the dim glow of streetlights casting long shadows across the empty roads. We parked outside a small motel, the neon sign flickering weakly, and checked in without saying much to the clerk. Inside the room, the silence was suffocating. Mark spread out his notes on the small table, his hands moving with a frantic energy as he tried to make sense of the data he'd collected. Sarah uploaded her footage to her laptop, her eyes glued to the screen as she reviewed the images. Kareem paced back and forth, muttering to himself, while I sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window at the dark desert beyond. And then the lights went out. The room plunged into darkness, and for a moment, all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing. Then, from somewhere outside, the hum started again, low, resonant, and unmistakable. Sarah turned to me, her face illuminated by the faint glow of her laptop screen. It's here, she said, her voice barely audible. Before I could respond, the window rattled, and a blinding light flooded the room. It wasn't coming from the horizon this time. It was right outside, filling every corner of the space with its oppressive glow. Kareem backed into the corner, his face pale with terror. What do we do? He whispered. None of us had an answer. All we could do was watch as the light seemed to seep through the walls, bending reality itself. The hum grew louder, almost deafening, and I realized with a sinking feeling that this wasn't just a phenomenon. It was something alive, something that wasn't going to let us go. The light was everywhere. It consumed the room, bleaching the walls and floors with an unnatural glow that made it impossible to tell where one surface ended and another began. The hum had grown so loud that it felt like it was inside my skull, vibrating through my bones. My instincts screamed at me to move, to do something, but I was frozen in place, unable to look away from the impossible sight unfolding before us. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the light disappeared. The hum cut out mid-note, leaving a silence so profound that it felt deafening in its own way. For a moment, none of us moved. The room was dark again, lit only by the faint glow of Sarah's laptop, but the air felt charged, as if the light had left something behind. What just happened? Kareem's voice broke the silence, trembling with fear. Mark was already moving, his hands fumbling for his equipment. I don't know, he said, his voice tight, but we need to document this. Every detail. Document it. Kareem snapped. Are you kidding me? That thing, whatever it is, just found us. It's not going to stop until, he trailed off, his words hanging in the air like a grim prophecy. Sarah was staring at her laptop screen, her face pale. Wait, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. There's something here. What do you mean? I asked, moving closer to her. She turned the laptop so we could see. The footage she had captured at the crater was playing, but there was something new, something we hadn't noticed before. In the moments when the light pulsed, faint shapes appeared within it, shadows moving in the glow, their forms indistinct but undeniably humanoid. Are those people? I asked, my voice shaking. They can't be, Mark said, though he didn't sound convinced. It's probably just an optical illusion. The light refracting through the mist. No, Sarah interrupted, her eyes locked on the screen. Look at the way they move. That's not random. They're deliberate. We watched in stunned silence as the shadows moved through the light, their motions almost ritualistic. It was as if they were performing some kind of dance, or a ceremony. And then, in one frame, one of the figures turned directly toward the camera. Had no face. "What the hell is that?" Kareem whispered, his voice shaking. Before anyone could answer, the lights in the room flickered back on, bathing us in the harsh glow of the motel's fluorescent bulbs. For a moment it felt almost normal, like the events of the past few minutes had been some kind of shared hallucination. But then we heard it. A knock at the door. We all froze. The knock came again, louder this time, echoing through the room like a gunshot. "Don't answer it," Kareem said, his voice barely audible. But Mark was already moving toward the door, his hand hesitating on the doorknob. "What if it's someone who can help us?" he asked, though he didn't sound convinced. "Help us?" Kareem hissed. "You think whatever's out there is here to help us?" Mark hesitated, his hand hovering over the lock. And then the knock came again, harder this time, shaking the flimsy door on its hinges. "Mark, don't," Sarah said, her voice sharp with fear. But it was too late. He turned the lock and opened the door. There was no one there. The hallway was empty, stretching out in both directions under the flickering fluorescent lights. But just as Mark started to step back, something caught his eye. A faint glow was coming from the far end of the corridor, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. "Do you see that?" he asked, his voice tight. We all moved closer, peering into the hallway. The glow grew brighter, and for a moment, I thought it was the light from the crater. But then I realized it was coming from something smaller, a single object lying on the floor. Mark stepped out into the hallway, moving cautiously toward the light. "Mark, don't!" I called after him, but he didn't stop. When he reached the object, he knelt down and picked it up. It was a small metallic disc about the size of a coin, engraved with strange symbols that seemed to shift and change under the light. "What is it?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Mark said, turning the disc over in his hands. "But it's warm. Like it's alive." Suddenly, the disc pulsed with light, and Mark dropped it with a cry, clutching his hand. The disc hit the floor and began to vibrate, emitting a high-pitched whine that grew louder with each passing second. "Get back!" Kareem shouted, pulling Mark away from the disc. The light from the disc grew brighter, filling the hallway with an intensity that rivaled the crater. And then, in an instant, it exploded, not with fire or force but with sound. A deafening roar filled the air, drowning out our screams, and the light expanded, engulfing everything. When the light finally faded, we found ourselves standing in the desert again, the motel nowhere in sight. The sky above us was pitch black, and the air was thick with the hum we had come to dread. "What just happened?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. Mark was staring at his hands, his face pale. "It's not just light," he said quietly. "It's not just energy. Something else. Something alive." Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath us began to tremble. The hum grew louder, and the light appeared on the horizon again, racing toward us like a living thing. And this time there was no escaping it. The light roared toward us, a living wall of brilliance that seemed to swallow everything in its path. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, empty and unyielding, offering no shelter from the inevitable. We stood frozen, the weight of our choices crushing down on us as the hum grew louder, vibrating through the ground and our very bones. In those final moments before the light reached us, Mark whispered something under his breath. It was too soft to hear, but the look in his eyes told me everything. He wasn't afraid anymore. There was a strange resolve in his expression, as if he understood something the rest of us didn't. And then it hit us. The light was everywhere, consuming us in a way that defied comprehension. It wasn't like being blinded or burned. It was like being unraveled. I could feel it tearing through my thoughts, my memories, my very sense of self. Time seemed to stretch and collapse all at once, moments from my past flashing before me in rapid succession. I saw my childhood, my first love, the mistakes I'd made, the things I'd never said. It was as if the light was peeling back the layers of who I was, exposing every truth, every fear, every regret. But it wasn't just me. I could feel the others too, Mark, Sarah, Kareem. Their emotions, their thoughts, their essence. We were connected in a way that was both beautiful and horrifying, our minds tangled together in the endless expanse of the light. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. I opened my eyes to find myself standing in the desert again, but everything was different. The sky was a strange shade of gray, and the air felt heavy, almost metallic. The others were with me, their faces pale and haunted, but the light was gone. What just happened? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. I don't know, Mark said, his voice hollow. But I think it wanted us to understand. Understand what? Kareem snapped, his fear turning to anger. That it can mess with our heads. That it can rip us apart and put us back together like we're nothing. Mark didn't answer. He was staring at the ground, his hands clenched into fists. It's not just energy, he said quietly. It's not just some random phenomenon. It's alive. And it's trying to communicate. Communicate, Sarah repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. With what? We don't even know what it is. Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath us began to shift. The sand rippled like water, and a massive shape began to rise from the earth. It was the crater, but it was different now. Larger, more defined. The black mist we had seen before was gone, replaced by an intricate lattice of glowing patterns that pulsed with a rhythm that felt almost purposeful. We stepped back instinctively as the patterns shifted, forming shapes that looked eerily familiar. They were letters, symbols from languages we recognized and others we didn't. And then, as if it had been waiting for this moment, the lattice formed a single word. Joyce. What does it mean? Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Mark stepped forward. His eyes locked on the glowing patterns. I think it's asking us to decide, he said. Decide what? Kareem demanded. What could we possibly have to decide? We don't even know what's happening. But deep down I already knew. The light, the hum, the way it had connected us, it wasn't just trying to scare us. It was showing us something, testing us. Whatever this thing was, it was offering us a choice. As if to confirm my thoughts, the patterns shifted again, forming two distinct shapes. One was a symbol we didn't recognize, a jagged, angular design that pulsed with a fiery red light. The other was softer, more fluid, glowing with a cool blue hue. We have to choose, Mark said, his voice steady. One of these paths, one of these outcomes. But I don't think it's just about us. Whatever we decide, it's going to affect everything. Kareem shook his head, backing away. Whoa, no way. This isn't our responsibility. We can't make that kind of decision. But we have to, Sarah said, her voice firm. We don't have a choice. If we walk away, who knows what it'll do? We stood there in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on us. The symbols pulsed in time with our heartbeats, as if the light itself was waiting for us to act. And then, without warning, Mark reached out and touched the blue symbol. The world exploded in light. For a moment, I thought we were back in the crater, the hum and the light overwhelming every sense. But then the world began to take shape again, and I realized we weren't in the desert anymore. We were standing in a vast open space, surrounded by endless skies and a horizon that seemed to stretch on forever. In the distance I could see the symbols from before, but they were different now. Softer, more harmonious. The hum was still there, but it was gentler, almost musical. And then I saw them. The shadows from the light, the figures we had seen in the footage. They were here, moving through the space with a grace that was both alien and familiar. One of them stepped forward, its form shifting and flickering like light through water. When it spoke, its voice was like a song resonating deep within my chest. Your choice has been made, it said. The path has been set. What path? I asked, my voice shaking. What did we choose? The figure didn't answer directly. Instead, it gestured toward the horizon, where a faint glow was beginning to rise. It was the same light as before, but it felt different now. Calmer, more purposeful. "The light will guide you," the figure said. "But the path is yours to walk." Before we could ask anything else, the figures began to fade, their forms dissolving into the air like mist. The light grew brighter, filling the space, and I felt a strange sense of peace, as if everything we had been through had led to this moment. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. We were back in the desert, the sky clear and the air still. The crater was gone, as if it had never been there, and the hum was nothing more than a memory. "What just happened?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Mark looked down at his hands, a faint glow still lingering on his fingertips. "I think we gave it what it wanted," he said. Kareem shook his head, his face pale. "And what was that?" Mark didn't answer. None of us did. Because deep down we all knew the truth. We had changed something far bigger than ourselves. And whatever lay ahead, the light would always be watching. But as we turned to leave, a single thought lingered in the back of my mind. Had we chosen the right path? Or had the light simply shown us what it wanted us to see? The walk back to the car was eerily silent. The desert stretched out around us, vast and indifferent, as if it hadn't just played host to something beyond our understanding. The sky was starting to lighten with the faintest traces of dawn, the stars fading as the horizon softened into hues of blue and pink. For a moment, it felt almost normal, like the strange, otherworldly events we just experienced were part of a distant dream. But the weight in the air, the lingering hum in the back of my mind, told me otherwise. No one said a word as we climbed into the car, our faces drawn and pale. Mark slid into the driver's seat, his hands trembling as he gripped the wheel. Sarah sat beside him, her gaze fixed on the horizon, while Kareem and I sank into the back seat, staring out at the endless expanse of sand. We drove in silence, the only sound the soft crunch of tires on gravel and the occasional whisper of wind against the windows. None of us dared to break the quiet, as if speaking would somehow bring the light back, or worse, remind us of the choice we'd made. As the sun began to rise, casting long shadows across the desert, I finally found my voice. "Do you think it's over?" I asked, my words barely more than a whisper. Mark didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed on the road ahead, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his knuckles whitened on the wheel. Finally he spoke, his voice low and uncertain. "I don't know. Maybe it's over for us. But whatever that was, it's still out there." Kareem let out a shaky laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Out there. It's probably in here too," he said, tapping his temple. "You felt it, right? The way it got inside your head. I don't think we'll ever really get away from it." Sarah turned to look at him, her eyes sharp. "We're not supposed to get away from it," she said. "It didn't want to hurt us. It was trying to communicate, trying to guide us maybe." "Guide us to what?" Kareem shot back. "We don't even know what we agreed to. For all we know, we just signed the entire planet up for something we can't even understand." His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of the unknown. He wasn't wrong. None of us truly knew what we had done, what we had unleashed or prevented. But there was something in Sarah's expression, a quiet determination, that made me think she wasn't as uncertain as the rest of us. As the car climbed a small ridge, the desert opened up before us, revealing the town we had left behind hours ago. It looked exactly as we'd left it, quiet and unremarkable, its streets empty in the early morning light. For a brief, fleeting moment, I allowed myself to believe that we could return to our lives, that we could leave the light and the crater and everything that had happened behind us. But as we pulled into the motel parking lot, I felt the hum again, faint and distant, like a memory I couldn't quite shake. We gathered our things in silence, moving through the motions like ghosts. It wasn't until we were back in the room, the door closed behind us, that Mark finally broke the silence. "We need to document everything," he said, his voice firm. "Every detail, every feeling, every image. If this thing ever comes back, or if it's still out there, we need to be ready." Sarah nodded, already pulling out her laptop. I'll start with the footage. There's still so much we haven't analyzed. Kareem sank onto the bed, his face buried in his hands. And what if it doesn't come back? What if we're just left with this emptiness, this not knowing? Then we live with it, I said quietly. Because we don't have a choice. For the next few hours, we worked in a strange, focused silence, piecing together the fragments of our experience. The footage from the crater, the symbols we'd seen, the strange glow of the metallic disc. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle we couldn't quite solve. But as the hours passed, a strange sense of calm began to settle over me. It wasn't peace exactly. There were still too many unanswered questions, too many lingering fears, but it was something close. A quiet acceptance of the fact that some mysteries weren't meant to be solved, at least not right away. By the time the sun was high in the sky, we were all exhausted. Mark leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. We need sleep, he said. We're not going to figure this out in one night. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. You're right. But we can't stop. We have to keep looking for answers. And we will, I said. But for now we need to rest. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together. As we lay in the dark, the hum still faintly buzzing at the edge of my awareness, I couldn't help but think about the choice we'd made. The light had tested us, challenged us, forced us to confront truths about ourselves we hadn't wanted to face. And in the end, it had left us with a question we might never fully answer. Had we done the right thing? But maybe that was the point. Maybe the light wasn't looking for answers. It was looking for something more human. Courage, curiosity, the willingness to make a choice, even in the face of the unknown. As sleep finally claimed me, I felt a strange sense of hope. Whatever the light was, whatever it had done, it had trusted us with something precious. And maybe, just maybe, that meant we were capable of more than we knew. In the end, the light didn't come back. Days turned into weeks, then months, and life went on. The crater remained a distant memory, a story we told only to ourselves. But every so often, when the world grew quiet and the stars filled the sky, I could still feel it, the faintest trace of the hum, like a whisper in the wind. And in those moments, I knew the light hadn't left us entirely. It was still out there watching, waiting. And maybe one day it would return. But until then, we would carry its memory with us, a reminder of the choices we'd made and the mysteries we'd faced. Because some stories don't end. They just change shape, shifting like the light itself, waiting for the next chapter to begin.